Welcome everyone to another episode of NapChats. This is episode 3. NapChats is a conversation between me, I'm Caleb, I'm the pastor at Cross of Life, and my wife Johanna, about parenting in a age like ours and kind of applying biblical principles to that and wrestling with the ideas. And we're hoping it's kind of an unscripted sort of picture into how Christians can think through these ideas, and maybe that's helpful for you. We are on location in our backyard because in Ontario, we're still in a stay-at-home order, so we can't go anywhere else.
Where would we film this anyway?
I suppose. And I did just get out on a run, so that was a pretty beautiful day here in Ontario. So I'm happy. I'm in a good mood, which means my answers will probably be less cynical, which is probably good for everybody involved. But we rigged up the low tech. This is my phone on attached to a chair by some strings, so we are high production quality here today. So Johanna, what are we talking about today for episode 3?
Yeah, today we are talking about money. Specifically, how do we talk about it with our kids? Our culture nowadays, it's so full of materialism, coveting. I mean, you just turn on the TV or watch a game and there's like advertisements and everything. And furthermore, growing up, I didn't really hear preaching on coveting at all. So, and that, I mean, you do, so that's good. But I think just how do kids get it? Because it's so opposite of the world. How do you get that into a little kid's brain that wanting things, it's I don't know, it's okay to want things, but it's not okay to covet things. Certain desires are good, but they need to be godly. How do you get that into a kid's brain at a young age?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's tough because every good gift that God gives us, we quickly turn into idolatry, which is the case with coveting. I mean, God made us dependent beings, right? Which means we're going to want/need things in general, right? And so you're right that wanting things or having a desire for things is not an inherently bad quality, and especially in the case of a child where they are so dependent. They're going to just ask for more things and want more things, and they're going to get into habit. And so maybe while they're asking for good things like, hey mom, can I have a glass of water? And they're going to realize that that's being answered regularly. They're going to then assume that, okay, well then I can have, this toy that I want from the store or something like that. And I don't think it's an inherently covetous way of thinking. So I think, yes, children are sinful by nature, and yes, they do want things that they don't necessarily need. But I think we just have to temper that and say, part of this is, I think, pretty normal for children to just want stuff. Yeah. But you're talking more about in the terms of how do you manage the inputs that are coming in from other people, right?
That and just the fact that as they grow up, it's just so slippery, I think. I grew up and I thought, oh, I don't covet. And then all of a sudden I'm an adult and I'm like, oh, I do. I really do covet, and it's ugly. And how do you get your kid to catch themselves before that and realize it's happening and fight against the culture?
Yeah, so this is where the spiritual disciplines, I think, are really helpful, right?
Yeah,
So
we've been talking about this a lot.
So fasting and Sabbath days and that sort of stuff are going to, and tithing is another one, right, is going to show you that you necessarily can and should live on less time, less money, less food, less in general than what you're given.
Okay.
Right, and that's a very solid biblical principle that God is giving us more than we need so that we can be a blessing to other people through it, and so that we realize how overabundant His blessing and provision is for us, just in a regular, everyday life. And so if you can help your kids by training them to live without certain things, that's going to, I think, make them less covetous. Of course, all these things come from the gospel ultimately. So, you can't just okay, I'm going to take stuff away from my kids and that's not going to, it's going to make them not covet. Because I think that's actually going to irritate them in some cases. Maybe saying instead of that, let's just remember that you have this many things that God has given you, right? So in our case, for example, we make a certain amount of money every year and we give an offering of that to our church. And what we say, or at least we try to say, is we can live on that. And how amazing is it that God gives us that new amount of money after we've given our offerings, right? And that's the fact that I get paid anything to do my job is amazing. So that kind of attitude from the gospel is coupled with the spiritual disciplines is going to be kind of how you approach that, I think.
Yeah. So it's just the power of rhetoric in our in our family and how we talk about what we have and the things that we possess. And I would say so many people, when I hear them talk, and I do this myself, is just like, just scraping by, like, man, well, I'm just barely making payments, just barely whatever. And, because I need this, and this. And like, I think our word need is not accurately used most of the time. So it's being really careful with that. Also, one of the biggest blessings of being in Canada has been how different cultures talk about their way of life before coming here, and people who have 2 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment or something, and they're so grateful because here, wow, there's so much abundance. And in my brain, you're living in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 kids, like that, you can't do that. But here it's abundance because it's safe and it's good, and they're not squishing their grandma and grandpa in the same house or something, and people see abundance differently from other cultures, and that really put a mirror in my face of like, oh, I don't look at materials the way that most of the world looks at materials. The idea of having 3 kids in 1 bedroom or something like that, what? Who does that? But that's fine. There's so many things where we look at things and like, you can't do this because we're North Americans. But most of the world does that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this probably requires some conversation too, because if you want to take it from a biblical point of view, like Paul will say, if we have food and clothing, that's enough. Mm. And so a biblical idea of contentment is food and clothing, not even housing, not even like anything else beyond that, is contentment by a biblical standard. And so obviously we're given more than that in a first world country. But I would even say many people who live in ways that you're describing, they're also given food and clothing, and they ought to be content with that as well. Mm. So I think we get a little bit self-conscious as North Americans because we are so rich that we have, a consumer culture, and, we're the ones who are the least content. And yeah, that's probably true. That doesn't mean that there aren't other people who aren't content either. It's just a human problem that we're not content with what we have. And so, yeah, I think your call on need versus want is a good thing. It's a good mechanism to be pushing the things in your life through. Is this a need or is this a want? Sure. On the other hand, though, I want to be generous too, to yeah, we're super rich in our country. Also, it's really expensive to live in our country.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I can say all I want that statistically, if you make if you make the median income in Mississauga, you are in the top 1% of wage earners in the world. What I don't usually say, and I probably should say, is that if you live in Mississauga, you also live in the 1% of the most expensive places to live in the world, even just to get your basic necessities. We're not talking about your yacht. We're talking about I need a car, even just a beater to get to work, and I have to pay for gas and I have to pay for insurance on that car. And I need to have some place to live, and even a 1-bedroom apartment in Mississauga is a pretty expensive get right now.
Yeah,
so.
But I would say that pushing against it a bit, that's all a privilege. You could live with your parents and not pay rent, and you could not have a car and just take the bus or ask for a ride from a buddy. Those aren't even needs, I don't think, right? And I think I think that's why I'm pushing the whole culture narrative of other cultures think this way, is because we expect that by the age of 24 you are able to pull your own weight, and some people can't, and I think that's okay to say these things that we think are needs, that I need to be on my own. They don't have to be needs. It's okay to ask for help from your family. That's what families are for. And so, yeah, it's expensive here, but I don't think that is an excuse. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think if you want to make a universal principle, because I agree with you, people could do these things. I don't think everybody can do those things. You're definitely going to run into people who...
Bad parents.
They have bad parents, or their parents their parents kicked them out, or where they work and the only place that they can find housing, there isn't a bus route. There are complications to that, but in general, I would agree with you. Most people can do those things. If you want to give a universal principle, it's always going to be, regardless of whether you make $1,000 a month or $100,000 a month, you live within your means.
Yep.
Right, and so that is the most effective thing, I think, in in teaching your kids like what we can and can't do. The phrase that I at least found most effective in my childhood, as far as just understanding how money works and how to be a good manager of my money, is my parents saying to me, "We can't afford that." And the truth is they could, right? They could buy it, but they had chosen to allocate their money in such a way that allowed them to live within their means. They could have put it on a credit card. They could have taken money away from their offerings to church or something like this in order to buy that. But in their mind, they had said, we're going to live within our means, and that's going to be our principle. And that's, I think, more helpful, because once you start to like try to think through like what are the things that make us a consumer society or things that make us a rich society, I think you start to get into things that are a little bit too personal, right? So if a person has a job where they make $500,000 a year, like, I mean, we can argue about whether they deserve to get paid that, but probably they deserve to get paid more than, me, right? Because they're doing something that's more complicated or requires more technical skills or whatever. And like, good for them. They should make that money, and then they should live within their means of that money. Right? That's just, I think that's. Otherwise, you're getting, I think, a little bit too close to way too personal situations.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, I wanted to bring this back to kids a little bit more and talk about like, there's your needs, but like, I think a lot of times we talk about a kid's happiness as a need. Like, my kid needs these experiences, these toys, this yard to be happy, and that's a need. And I guess I'm curious, is there any scriptural foundation on that?
Yeah. So, in the United States, they have this principle of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? It's a big thing in the United States. Here, we don't have that exact same statement, but I think there's sort of that ethos still exists here, that like being happy is supposed to be a thing that everyone has a right to do. The interesting thing about that historically is, like, when we think of happiness, we think of like euphoria, right, or a good emotional feeling. Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote those words, didn't mean that. What he meant was the holistic life, the whole life. And probably the closest word that we have to that is the Hebrew word shalom, which we think of as peace, but really it could be more literally translated wholeness. Or prosperity, but not prosperity in the sense of like excess, prosperity in the sense of like able to live a full life.
And that sounds so spiritual, and I love rhetoric that's spiritual, because we don't have much of that, but I think
so a whole life, or a shalom life, or a happiness, as far as the American Constitution would say it, is it consists of 4 parts. So it consists of a certain level of prosperity. Like, you have to be able to have enough resources that you're not like hand to mouth. You're not just paying for your groceries for the day just to survive, right? You don't have enough money just to go to the store to get enough to survive till tomorrow. So there has to be a certain level of prosperity where you're able to at least gather some resources, maintain some resources. Okay. There has to be a certain level of freedom. So you have to feel that you are not being coerced to behave a certain way completely by an outside entity of something like this. So like, obviously in a country where you have strict rules on exactly how you have to behave in every situation, like, that is not a full life. On the other hand, by the way, we would not say that like complete freedom to do whatever I want is a whole life either. That's actually slavery to my desires, which is even worse. But so we would say like a certain level of freedom.
That's a whole nother conversation. Keep going.
Okay, number 3 would be a certain amount of safety. So I need to feel that I can walk out my front door in the morning and I'm not going to die because somebody's going to shoot me or something like this, right? And then finally, it would be a sense of purpose. So you have to have something that's worth getting up for in the morning. And I think actually, as we look at our society, that's the one that we struggle with the most right now. So we have prosperity of wealth. We're able to have enough resources to survive. We have what was the second one I said? The third one I said was safety. Safety and
the one I was going to tangent on. I lost it too. That's so funny.
Man, this is good production. I can't believe I just said it. Literally just said it. You all who are watching this are like screaming it at me right now.
It's funny that I can't think of it either. I was going to comment on it too.
Prosperity, well, safety. We have safety. We have freedom. Was the other one I said. So freedom, we have that. We have the ability to do generally what we want to do. Purpose is the tough one, because we can, eat the food that we want to eat, stay in our safe houses, and watch Netflix because that's what we like to do. That's all 3 of those. But that's not a fulfilling life, right? And so for your children, to bring this back to your original question, like, you want them to value the full or holistic happiness that shalom offers, rather than what they are being sold as happiness, which is just a constant state of euphoria, which is unsustainable.
Yeah.
It's just unsustainable. No matter how many toys you buy, no matter how much good food, no matter how much good experiences you have.
Because you always want more, and that
right.
blows up.
Right. So you want to train your children to say, what is happiness is, can I get up in the morning and do what I want to do, generally? Am I safe doing it? Do I have something that I'm getting up for, purpose? And then do I have the material resources that I need? And I don't know if I have a good answer to how you get your children to value that.
Yeah.
Without having a philosophical conversation about shalom with them. But
the answer is not they need to be in enough, or getting enough toys, or having enough, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I think I definitely idolize having a yard, especially since it is such a valuable thing here. People just don't have yards in Toronto. Like, that was something I idolized, and like, they need to have a yard, or they need to at least be in a sport, or the sport they want to be in, or whatever the thing is, the experience. And I think, I guess what I'm saying is those aren't shalom.
Yeah, right. And entertainment, I mean, that's a good thing, right? We never want to say that, like, having joyful experiences is a bad thing or something you shouldn't give to your children. Like, that's a way to bless them. But your children can be without that euphoric feeling and still be okay.
Yeah, I think that's where I was talking about needs, is like, or expectations of, you have to have this. And I guess I want to make sure our children don't ever think, well, I get this. This is a thing I get. Or, I can't, I don't know, maybe if our children are in the ministry someday, what if they get a call to a place where they, like, literally can't have a yard? And they think, well, we can't have a yard in this new country, so I'm not going to take the call because I can't live without a yard. Which is, like, maybe that's a realistic thing. But I guess I just want to teach our children, or what if the whole country goes to up in flames? I don't know. Everyone talks about that nowadays. So, like, what if that all happens? Like, our kids, I want them to still be okay and not feel a loss of joy because their material blessings went away. And you're right, they are good things, and they are, like, things that I do still, like, I still want to have our children have a yard. I'm not going to sacrifice that if I can help it, but I want to not have them expect it.
So one thing I'm thinking as you're saying that, and that's helpful, it definitely isn't something you want to set up expectations that are unrealistic to sustain. But when it comes to purpose, like, every one of us is going to de facto find a purpose, right?
Okay.
That purpose is just sometimes not going to be a worthwhile purpose, right? So if my purpose is to just be entertained, like, that's, I use this term meta-narrative sometimes, this bigger story that like overarches your life, that you're playing a role in, right? So if you're, to think about it this way, like, if you're a character in a story of, like, a novel or a movie or something like that, the meta-narrative is the whole movie. What you're experiencing right now, or your life, may just be a small portion of that bigger story, right? If you're just, like, a character who shows up for one scene or one chapter, or if you're the protagonist of the story, whatever. So you have this big story that you're telling yourself. If your big story is, like, my purpose is, I work so I can make money so that I can, buy my streaming services so I can watch TV at the end of the night before I go to sleep, whether you're an adult or a child, like, that is a purpose. That's what you're importing into this idea of purpose. And it's not a very good purpose, but it is a purpose. And so if we can train our children to see their purpose, not as to be entertained, but to be whatever, helpful to the family, or helpful to society, or a protector of their siblings, or, they're obedient to mom and dad, or whatever the thing is, that is a far more certain, stable purpose and fulfilling purpose that's not going to be, oh, there's a baby awake. I guess I'll finish this one on my own. That is not going to be shaken by the changing winds of culture, or the changing winds of the outdoors, which maybe you've heard. For some reason, it started out sunny and warm out here, but now it's windy and cold. Canada, let me tell you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of NapChats. NapChats are a chance for my wife and I to talk about parenting when our babies are asleep, but now one of our babies is awake. So we'll look forward to checking in with you for another episode soon. If you have something you'd like us to talk about, or something that you're thinking about and you'd like to share with us, we would be glad to include you on the next episode of NapChats. Talk to you soon.